I'm going to say good afternoon to everyone because where I'm at, it's afternoon. I suspect if you're tuning in, obviously, if you're tuning in from the West Coast, you're still in the AM hours. But whatever time it is, wherever you're at, welcome to you. We're so really pleased to have you joining us this morning in this program we're going to have. And as you know, it's entitled Leading While Black in Local Government. And this is one in a series of courageous conversations that we have been hosting here at ICMA during Black History Month, of course. And we're proud to do it. I think as our members, you know that we have been engaged in this kind of work for many, many years, for decades, quite frankly. We've certainly, I would tell you, to a significant degree, elevated our game, our generation in this work in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. So this is an important conversation that we're going to have today. Our intent is to really try to explore how local government leaders navigate historical and future challenges in their careers in the context that I'm talking about as Black public administrators. Of course, there's no shortage of Black talent in local government today, yet there are still systemic failures. Some might otherwise characterize it as systemic racism that persists, creating barriers to the promotion and retention of Black professionals in executive and leadership roles in local government. Now, at a time when local governments are renewing their commitment to equity and inclusion, there's still some fundamental questions that we should continue to explore, and that is, our policymakers, change agents, and other allies keeping their promise to build a supportive environment for Black leaders to grow and thrive? Think about that question. Also, how can Black leaders in local government chart their own path forward? Think about that question as well. Creating and maintaining space for the next generation of Black leaders in local governments to advance is key in improving organizational health. I think we all know that there's some science behind the importance of a diverse organization, bringing diversity and women into organizations, science that supports that organizations are far more productive with that full embrace of diversity. And so today, that's kind of the range of things that we're going to explore and perhaps beyond as the conversation ensues. And I have the privilege today of being joined in this program by four esteemed Black public administrators that I have the pleasure at this time to introduce to you all. And I'm going to start with Tanisha Briley. Tanisha is currently in her second year as city manager of Gaithersburg, Maryland, with a staff of more than 600 employees and a $70 million budget, serving a city of 70,000 residents. Her career spans nearly 2 decades in local government, having previously served as the city manager of Cleveland Heights, Ohio, and in various leadership positions with the city of Davenport, Iowa. She has an MPA from Cleveland State University and is an active member of ICMA, NFBPA, and the National Academy of Public Administration. She not that long ago became a Napa Fellow. She also serves as the chair of the Board of Directors for Mission Square, formerly known as ICMA RC, and I'm on that board along with her, and I can tell you that she brings great leadership to that role and has been doing an exceptional job there. So Tanisha and her husband, Vincent, reside in Gaithersburg, Maryland, with their rambunctious, loving dogs named Max And I think that's Zuri, Tanisha, if I got the name right. So welcome to you, Tanisha. We're glad to have you here. Next, Jerome Fletcher. Jerome is the city manager of Northport, Florida, with a budget of more than $196 million, more than 700 employees, and nearly 800 residents. Northport has a master plan community currently in development, which is listed as number 6 in the country. And the city is also in the top 10 mid-sized metro areas in the country in growth during the past few years. Prior to joining Northport, Jerome served as the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for Montgomery County, Maryland, a suburb of the DC metro area with nearly 1.1 million residents. As an advocate for diversity and inclusion, he also led the team that ensures residents were given a fair shot to thrive in the county regardless of their economic circumstances. Jerome obtained a master's degree in public administration from the University of Phoenix and is currently an ICMA credentialed candidate, scheduled to receive his full designation as a credentialed manager in April of this year. He enjoys spending time with his wife of nearly 19 years, 2 incredible children, ages 16 and 11, as well as playing as much golf as his time and parenthetically his family allows him to do. And Jerome, I'm guessing you probably swing them pretty good on the golf course.
I try my best, sir.
Try your best. That's good. That's all you can do. I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Tammi Saddler Jones. Currently, she serves as the city manager of South Fulton, Georgia. She's been in that position since October of 2020. She leads the city's executive team and managing day-to-day operations for its 97,000 residents. Prior to her role in South Fulton, Tammi, a local government veteran of more than 20 years, served in, and Tammi, help me with that name, SMY? Smyrna, Georgia for 11 years. And under her leadership, Smyrna made Money Magazine's 50 Best Places to Live in the United States 2018 list. She is an active member of numerous professional organizations, including the International City County Management Association, ICMA, and the Georgia City County Management Association. She also is an ICMA credentialed manager and serves as the ICMA on the ICMA credentialing advisory board as one of the representatives for the Southeast region. She earned a master's degree in public administration from the Ohio State University. And you see the big smile when I said Ohio State University. That's right. Well, we have the Midwest in common at least.
OH. Sorry, Mark.
Oh, excuse me.
IO.
That's right. I finally want to introduce my friend, actually, and former associate in Austin, Mark Washington, who is the current city manager in Grand Rapids, Michigan, overseeing a workforce of 1,600 employees along with a $500 million budget that serves a city of 200,000 residents. Since Mark's arrival in Grand Rapids in 2018, he's led efforts to create a 4-year strategic plan, create a public safety oversight and accountability office, establish both an equity and innovation office, and also launched a homeless outreach team. I didn't know that, Mark. I'm glad to hear that. Mark has over 26 years of local government service under his belt, having previously worked in leadership positions for the Texas cities of Fort Worth, and as I said before, of Austin, Texas, while I was serving there as city manager. He has an MBA from Amberton University, as well as a doctorate degree in education from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He is an active member of ICMA, NFBPA, and also serves as a trustee for both the Michigan Municipal League and Paul Quinn College. It was a pleasure to read your bios. Obviously, we have a very esteemed and well-accomplished group of people that are serving on this panel today. So welcome to all of you. I see a couple of hands. Is that on purpose? Jerome,
That is applause.
That's applause. Okay.
Yes.
Very, very good. Very good. So for our discussion today, as I was saying to the panelists before we came on the air, the hope is to have this be a conversational, a dialogue. And I certainly will have some questions that I'm going to put to them, but hopefully the conversation will be free flowing. I know that we have quite a few people out there that have logged into this program today, and I want to encourage your participation as well. So if you have questions or comments, observations, please feel free to put them in the chat. Tammi, that you see right there on the screen, will be monitoring the chat and will give us a high sign in the event that one of you have a question you'd like to put to the panel. So with all of that said, why don't we step right into it? And I'm gonna just start it with a simple question of having each one of you, and briefly, just describe very briefly how you were introduced to local government. I know we all have a little bit of story to tell about how that happened to us. We might have been on a different path, but we ended up here. So Tammi, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mark. And good afternoon to each and every one of you. My path to local government actually started when I was in graduate school at Ohio State. Between our first and second year of graduate school, we had to do an internship. And my internship, along with another individual, we were the only two that got accepted into an internship with the city of Columbus, Ohio. And from that exposure, you know, it just opened a door of opportunity for me. I wanted to be a lawyer, and that didn't happen. But, you know, I was very blessed to be in this career and be exposed to this career. I'm not one of those individuals that my family worked in local government. I'm actually probably the first one in my family. And so even, you know, being in this role, I continue to do what I have to do to expose, you know, the younger generation to what we do. And I'm so grateful for being a city manager and being able to, of course, speak on this panel today with my other esteemed presenters. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. We have our starting journeys were very similar. I thought I was going to be a lawyer as well when I was in at the university. Tanisha, how about you?
So I went to graduate school wanting to be a nonprofit executive. I was really passionate about lots of urban policy issues and chose to go to Cleveland State, which happened to be second ranked in the nation at that time for city management. I had no idea what that meant, however, like most of us, no clue what a city manager is or does. I was there for their nonprofit leadership program. And so happened that Cy Murray was my very first professor in my 600 Introduction to Public Administration class. And so Cy introduced me to the field. I still wasn't sold. By the end of that course, I think it was his mission for me to at least look toward local government management. And I would tell you the selling point for me, I had the opportunity to attend an NFBPA conference, a national forum for Black public administrators conference during my second year in graduate school with Cy. And Pat Martell said this a while ago. I know it's not an original quote, but when she became ICMA's first woman of color president, she talked a lot about you can't be what you don't see. And for me, walking around that conference and being exposed to so many amazing Black leaders, men and women, city managers, it sealed the deal for me that I could see myself in their shoes, that they had paved the way, and I became immediately on fire for local government and city management profession in general at that point.
Well, that's a great story. And you mentioned Cy Murray, but Cy Murray has such a legacy of bringing young people, and in particular young Black people into the profession, and you're one of them, and I know he's very proud of the work that you've done and the accomplishments that you've achieved in the time that you've been in our great profession. So thank you for sharing that story. Marc, how about you, sir?
Thank you, Marc, for inviting me to be part of this great conversation. My story begins actually in high school exposure. It was the summer of the 10th grade, the initial exposure into public service, and I was part of the old JTPA program, Job Training Partnership Act, that had an opportunity for giving youth exposure to employment, and I worked for the city of Port Arthur. And I never thought about anything more of it until after I was in graduate school and looking for an intern opportunity. And there in Fort Worth, I contacted then city manager, Bob Terrell, African-American city manager, first African-American city manager in Fort Worth, who gave me an opportunity to serve as an intern, and then started my career in the city then. And I agree with what Tanisha said. It became inspirational because, you know, seeing someone do the job, both there and then, of course, later Marc would work in Fort Worth as an assistant, served as inspiration to, you know, provide that, you know, possibility that you can actually achieve what you're seeing others do. And so that, along with the other supporting opportunities from NFBPA and certainly working with Marc and Austin, it inspired me to pursue the profession of city manager, even at times when I didn't even think I was ready. You know, that was the encouraging part of it.
Well, essentially, you mentioned Bob Terrell as being the first manager, Black manager in Fort Worth. I will tell you all that Marc holds that distinction in Grand Rapids, being the first Black person to be city manager there, as I did in Austin, for that matter. So it's interesting how things occur. Jerome, tell us your story.
Thank you, Marc. I appreciate it. And as I said before, thanks for having me. Thanks for the panel. I'm glad to be a part of this group. So when I got out of college in Greensboro, North Carolina, I went to HBCU, North Carolina A&T State University. And when I got out of college, you know, there was no career pathway that I had ever seen of public administration, which, you know, I wish I had known then what I eventually learned. I think it could have shaved some time off of my journey to the chair. But, you know, I did come out of college and I did go work in a department at Greensboro Coliseum. And I thought that my career path was going to just stay there. It was a great job. I was happy. And, you know, one day my boss told me that I would never, you know, grow any higher than the business manager that I was. And, you know, it was a very sobering moment for you to hear that from someone. And we had just had our first African-American city manager, Mr. Rashad Young, in the city. And he had asked me, you know, hey, you know, you ever thought about coming down to City Hall? And at first I thought, you know, I'm good where I'm at. And then when I asked that question to my current boss and he reaffirmed that I was not as good as I thought I was, you know, I took the journey and took the leap and went down to City Hall and started learning about all the different disciplines. And to me, seeing him with the knowledge he had of all the different disciplines of the city was inspiring, and it made me think, well, then I can do this. And so eventually I left the city of Greensboro, went, you know, as an assistant to the city manager in the city of Alexandria. I went to the District of Columbia and also Montgomery County. And as I tell people, I took the scenic route through the DMV. And, you know, it was good, though. It was a great experience. And it took me almost exactly 10 years from the time I was told that I would never do anything more to being the first city manager here in Northport, Florida, which, you know, as a city of 80,000 people is a lot smaller than the district or the DMV area. But, you know, it allows me the platform and the opportunity to show people that, you know, your journey isn't over until you say it's over. So no one can tell you how your story ends. And I know my story is far from finished, but, you know, we are here and I am here to inspire a new generation and teach them. And help them get to their highest levels of potential.
Yeah, I appreciate that story. And then not only can no one tell you where your journey ends, they can't tell you what your journey is going to be, right? You have something to say about that. And in your case, you were deliberate in making your own decisions about what you were going to do. And here you are today, leading one of America's cities. So that's just a fabulous story. Let me dig a little deeper at this point in terms of what we want to talk about today. And we all recognize that we're in an extended time of awareness nationwide. We're seeing this recommitment towards equity and inclusion. And so with that in mind, I'm going to pose 3 questions to you. The first one is, how effectively do you feel local governments have been in creating substantive structural and procedural/policy changes to meet the promise of equity and inclusion? The other question is, where do we have roadblocks that still persist? And then what additional measures are needed to remove those roadblocks? Who wants to start with that first piece? How effectively do you feel local governments have been? Jerome?
Sure, I'll go first. I think that it depends. I think it depends on what your particular local government has done. You know, where the area I just left, there was a heavy emphasis on the diversity and equity and inclusion, and we did, you know, create an office. You create policy, and I thought a lot was done in the way of making sure that we showed the world that, you know, Montgomery County was serious about meeting that challenge, so to speak. But I do believe personally that you have to go deeper than that. You know, it's deeper than just a policy. It's deeper than just you creating a structure. If the people in the leadership roles aren't 100% committed to listening to that voice, committed to championing those efforts when no one's looking, you're not going to be successful. And I felt like a lot of it was for show in front of the cameras, in front of the citizens, and not meant to change the hearts and minds of the people who are actually responsible for the system being, you know, the way that it's implemented right now. You've got to dig deeper, and it takes a very conscious effort. And I'm not sure that the leadership at the highest levels, the people who don't necessarily always look like us, understand the true task at hand.
Sometimes when we have the situation where the leadership isn't committed, does that reflect something about what's going on, not politically, but also in the community? It seems like, you know, some communities and the elected officials are, I guess, more ready to engage that way than others. So was that apparent?
I think so.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I certainly think so, because, you know, sometimes I guess people aren't ready to, or aren't comfortable having what we call those uncomfortable conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that, you know, even in a previous city that I worked at, like Jerome mentioned, we created a position, a diversity consultant, that helped, you know, come up with policies, help with training, presented information to our elected officials, but I think our community wasn't ready for that. So in turn, that position, I don't even think it lasted a year.
What was it called?
A diversity consultant. It was a consultant that we hired. It wasn't a full-time position. And I think that made it pretty easy to, you know, oh, if this doesn't work, then we tried.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes you have to try harder.
Yeah.
Tanisha, did you?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark.
You go right ahead.
Okay, thanks. You know, I was gonna build on something Jerome said. I think some of our challenge, no matter what your background or race is as city managers in this equity work, is that we report to a city council, right? So it's always kind of going to be in that context. But I also think that we've approached this work as far back as we can take it from a hearts and minds standpoint. And frankly, I'm over the hearts and minds, right? I'm not in this to change hearts and minds. We have certain tools and resources available to us in our roles as city managers, and that's where we need to focus. So it's about definitely you need the support of your city council, because we all know how that can go, and we can see ebbs and flow of that. We can see whether it's popular in the community and how much support you might actually get for actual change. But as I came from Cleveland Heights to Gaithersburg, there was a lot of talk about our commitment to equity and racial equity and wanting to see some change in what we do as an organization. And I had to poke at that. I probed my elected officials to try to really understand, how far are you okay with me going with this? Is this a ceremonial thing? Because I'm really not interested in doing ceremonial pieces. And we aren't going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to train our staff to have an open heart and an open mind. We need to set the expectations and hold people accountable. That's what we do as city managers. And those are the kinds of tools we have available to us. So I always push back when we have these racial equity conversations with colleagues and equity managers and others about, are we really investing all this time to change people's minds? Because that is a waste of time at this point.
Well, it certainly seems very often like it's a waste of time. I mean, a bit of an idealist, so part of me still likes to feel like you can ultimately have an impact on hearts and minds. But like you, when it's clear to me that I can, and I'm talking about when I was a city manager and a practitioner, that came with a lot of power and authority. So where it was clear to me that I wasn't changing hearts and minds, but I could do anyway, I could advance change the way that we're talking about anyway, I did it.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, because I was in a position to do it. I had the formal power and authority, and I made those decisions. Who else has a comment about?
Yeah, I do. I want to go back to your question that you asked on how effective is local government, and I would answer in two ways: as effective as the leadership of the council, and as effective as the leadership of the manager, and former council manager. And the answer is today more effective than we were in the past, but not effective enough. And if I could, I think we have to acknowledge that many of the systemic issues that we face now regarding racial inequities and disparities are attributed to some of the practices that happen historically at the local level. The whole issue around police reform primarily involved incidents that happen in municipalities at the local level. And so where there's courage to improve upon those practices, I find is where you have elected leadership who, if not diverse, certainly understands the diversity of the community, and then then they become more inclined to have people serve at the appointed level that also has an understanding of the issues, but also has the will and the courage to address some of them. And so I think it's still an opportunity, it's still ongoing work. And as African American city managers, you often feel this sense like you're doing your best to be effective, but in many instances, both from people of color as well as others in the community, that it's still ongoing work. It's still never enough. So I think in short, it's better than it was, but not necessarily where we need to be, because we still have a lot of issues. Now, granted, we need support from partners at the federal level, state level, but a lot of the issues that our communities are upset about are local issues: investment in infrastructure, investment in transit, areas around public safety, how we police. Those are issues that we are in the seat to help solve.
Jerome, do you think Mark started out with where you have the political support from your elected officials, and that's part of what you necessary to move the ball on this. And of course, but what if you don't have that? From the elected officials, then what? Are you hamstrung? Are you precluded then from taking those kinds of measures, or are we talking about a profile in courage that's necessary?
So from my standpoint, Mark. You know, I do recognize the power that our elected officials hold. I do recognize the power that we hold, even if it's temporary or for however long that it is. I believe that in order to, if you want to make it stick, and if you want to make it be a long-term effort, you know, I want it to last longer than just me. I want it to be something that when people look back, they say, his impact is still going, even though he may not be here. And in order to do that, you know, the power of the elected official, I don't believe that we can always count on that. We have to take action. And when they see us, hopefully it will even motivate them to join on. And hopefully their reasons are as sincere and authentic as ours are, or people who are going through the challenge. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And I don't sort of pick and choose and say, well, they have to, you know, believe everything, you know, that I believe. My beliefs don't require them to, but, you know, I try to lead by example and make sure that at the end of the day that there's going to be some long standing things that are done here that people will not be able to ignore, even if they are without the power of the elected officials behind us.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Mark?
Comments on that? Yes.
Yep, I do have a question from the audience that was submitted privately regarding this whole piece. There has been mention about, you know, the performative show that we see when people are talking about equity and municipalities are discussing what they're doing and that they're committed to it. But the challenges are very deep, as you all have shared. The question I received was, how do you find the cities that are taking equity seriously?
Who wants to take a run at that question?
I will. I mean, they're from several perspectives. There are practices, groups or cohorts of communities that are part of the Government Alliance for Racial Equities. Those are cities that have embodied practices in their organization and their cohorts across the country. I have had a chance to participate, one in Austin, one here in Grand Rapids, 2 community members, but there are cities across the country, communities across the country. But I think you look at cities that are leading with data-driven practices. I think, as I heard earlier, that not only do you measure the problem in terms of investments, but you look at cities that have good policy and good budgets that align with those practices to make sure that they're improving outcomes. And so when I propose the budget as manager, which is my job, I also make sure I propose it using the equity lens and making sure that looking at all the programs where geography, ethnicity, and race or gender affect outcomes, and making sure that we proportionally invest, double down in those areas, parts of our communities that have been historically marginalized. And I'm able to give an account and say, of the $500 million of overall budget that I'm proposing, I can stand flat-footed and say $50 million of the proposed budget is being intentional about addressing historical racial inequities and actually measuring what we want to see in terms of positive outcomes.
Mark, I recall, and maybe the politics has changed, but I recall Grand Rapids being pretty conservative environment, Republican, et cetera. So am I hearing you say that both inside and outside City Hall, the kind of work you're talking about has been embraced?
It has. And so I go back to what, the previous question, I don't pick my bosses, they pick me. And when I came, I made sure, yes, you're hiring me to manage, but you're also hiring me to lead. I'm not just managing the current set of circumstances, but it's my job to bring forth these tough conversations that help them advance their policy. But also, if there's not the collective will of the city commission, there are also residents, community members who did pick them, who are interested in advancing, some real outcomes in these areas. And so there is a good inside-outside dynamic that's happening in our community, both at the staff level, the elected level, as well as the community level, that allows us to really come together and talk about how can we have good public-public partnerships and good public-private partnerships as well on some of these initiatives. Now, we're not perfect, right? Like any other community, we still have our challenges, but we do have the tough conversations. But I think what we have done here lately is making sure that there's a measure of accountability. You know, is the data saying we're getting better as a community?
Well, there's no ignoring the data. Any other comments about that? Any of you have? Go ahead, Tammi.
Oh, pardon me, Mark. I was going to add, pardon me, the city of South Fulton, we're one of Georgia's newest cities. We've only been in existence for 5 years. Actually, it'll be 5 years, May 1st. And we are actually a most recent cohort through National League of Cities, Cities of Opportunities. And so that, of course, focuses on equity issues. And I would say, you know, in regards to the question that was asked, that is a resource that you can see some cities that are really doing a great job addressing equity issues. So I just wanted to add that.
Mm-hmm. Tanisha, tell me what's the nature of the conversation in Gaithersburg?
Sorry, the mute button was elusive. You know, I think that the conversation in Gaithersburg is progressive. You know, I think the community that I have the privilege to serve is one of the most diverse small cities in the country. I believe we're the second most diverse cities. And so in a very short period of time, demographically, this community in less than 20 years went from a predominantly white community to a predominantly mostly minority community. And that is foreign-born, Hispanic, Asian American. It is an extremely, incredibly diverse community. And there is an imperative that comes with that I think we would all feel as city managers. I have the added benefit that my elected officials, my bosses, also feel that same imperative, that as a community, when we look at our quality of life outcomes, right, back to what Mark Washington was saying with respect to a data-driven approach, we understand that there's certain interventions that improve quality of life for those who are experiencing the most harshest outcomes, that makes it better for everyone, right? That allows us to be more effective, more productive, more successful as a community. And so I feel like I have the support of my city council in that they understand that basic tenet, and they really step back and allow for the staff and for me to help sort of lead what efforts we need to be moving forward to try and accomplish that. We're in an interesting jurisdictional, process here. It's new to me. I'm new to the DMV and new to Maryland. And so, there are a lot of drivers that are sort of outside of our control. So I've been focusing our efforts on an internal approach, really. Let's start with us first. There's so much we can do to fix and improve outcomes for the residents that we serve if we just start with us and not get too bogged down in the fact that we don't oversee or have much influence with the school district or the county or others. There's so much that can be done at just our level, at the municipal level. And I've gotten a lot of buy-in for that.
That's good. That's good to hear. Let me shift us a little bit. In conversations that we have about race equity and social justice, minority status is often, perhaps inadvertently, spoken almost as if it's a cross to bear, or at the very least something one must fight to have appreciated and accepted. In what ways has being Black proven an asset to your work? That's an interesting question to me. How has being Black helped you?
Yeah, I'll start off. If we were having this conversation outside of the context, it's Black History Month, and we had the representation of what the city manager profession looks like, it would probably be one person of color, if that, on this dialogue, as part of the dialogue. But because we are talking specifically leading while Black, I think it's acknowledgement of the reality that we can't just refer to ourselves as city managers, that we are African-American city managers. It is a double consciousness. We have to understand what it means to be both African-American as well as it means to be part of the profession. And I think it is a gift because it helps us, particularly when there are so many people of color that are suffering, to both identify and empathize in a very genuine way of what's both happening in the neighborhood, but also be able to discuss and propose and affect policy in a way that would help improve those conditions, and be able to have this duality. For me, it does, I should say. And W.B. Du Bois called it double consciousness, that we always have to be aware of our Blackness, but also in the context where we serve. So and then you know, in terms of the point about being a cross or a burden, you know, it's something I celebrate, but obviously it's something that others would take an opportunity to be critical of. Sometimes you hear about exceptionalism. Well, they only got it, only are in the position because of, not in spite of, but because of, and to either demean either the profession or one's accomplishment in getting to that point. But I do think it's something I celebrate and I affirm, and you know, make sure that I don't walk away from the conversation.
Reactions to that?
Well, first of all, I'm comfortable with the skin that I'm in. I celebrate the successes of African Americans that have come before me. I appreciate what they've done. I'm thankful that God made me Black on purpose. I see myself as an example or a model to other young people who may not have been even interested in this particular profession. I see myself as a model and hope for them that this is something that they can achieve if they truly are interested in this. And again, I have been, you know, intentional about trying to talk to younger people, particularly in my family, outside of my family, about, you know, the interests of looking at local government as a profession, because it's very rewarding. I love what I do. I've been doing it for 25 years, and I hope I can go 12 more, because that's going to be my retirement date. I'm 50 now, but I'll be 62 hopefully when I retire.
Tammi, would you say that your conversations with these young Black kids, do you think it's been persuasive? Have you seen anyone? Has anyone come back and told you that they see themselves having a life of public service at the local level? They have. Even when they thought that, you know, they just figured, oh, well, I'll just get a director's position or I'll just get another position in local government. After speaking to them, I mean, now they are saying, I'm interested in being a city manager. And, you know, I'm very grateful, because they said it's because I see the work that you've done, and it's because of the encouragement. And, you know, I think coaching and mentoring, starting at the high school level, is important. Here in Georgia, the Georgia City Managers Association, we're trying to get into the high school and undergraduate programs so we can mentor these young people and bring them into the profession very early, you know, before they decide to, you know, go off and do something else. And if they do, that's fine. We celebrate that. But I definitely want to see more female African Americans and male African Americans come into this profession.
I'd like to.
Go ahead, Tanisha.
I was going to expand a little bit on the student perspective in the initial question about an advantage of being Black. I've had lots of full circle moments in my career so far, and they have they have all hit me like a ton of bricks, where I sat on one side of the table and then find myself on the other side. One of those privileges has been to teach in the graduate program that I got my degree from, and I was teaching a seminar on city management class in the MPA program. And in the area I'm in, there are just not very many city managers in general, let alone Black city managers or women city managers. And here I am leading this class. And after my third semester teaching that course, it dawned on me that these students, which at the time were predominantly white students pursuing city management, that I, as their teacher, had normalized Black people being city managers, that has been their exposure. It was their exposure to the profession was through me. And so I had this opportunity to normalize that, no, Black people are city managers. It's not going to be an abnormal experience as it might be for so many of my colleagues, right? Who've just not had that opportunity. And so to have had that opportunity to influence these students that early in their career, not so much, even though I thought I taught them a lot of good things academically, but even just my presence in the classroom and how that normalized that Black women and Black people can be leaders in this field.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. From another perspective, what would you say to non-Black colleagues who may be struggling with the application of DEI principles and ICMA's contribution to that work in local government? I can certainly tell you that, and as we were talking before we started the show today, that ICMA has been in effect doing DEI work for several decades, 50, 60 years, as our research has taken us. But given the sort of the elevated awareness of it these days, as we've continued to do more, intensify our efforts in that regard in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, our board's declaration condemning systemic racism and all of that. Well, there's been tremendous support, and we put out a lot of stuff to try to make sure that members were informed, right, about the range of issues there. There has been significant pushback. How do we respond to colleagues struggling with the application of these principles in today's environment?
Mark, I will.
And I know you've seen some of that in Texas, Mark. I mean,
both in Texas and in Michigan. And I think a couple of things. Obviously, within the organization where you lead, you have more influence for those employees that work for you to make that an expectation and condition of the workplace. And anything less is unacceptable. And just be that bold and direct about it. In terms of the profession, managers in other communities, both across the state and the country, I do appreciate the leadership that ICMA is offering in this space. And Mark, very uncomfortable space for certain people, because not every city is the same. You have communities that are very homogeneous, that are very non-diverse, very white, and you have the governing body who are people who are elected by the constituents to reflect that community that they serve. And so what I find is when we have some of the peer conversations with our other managers in our association, it's from a place of unfamiliarity. And so we spoke earlier about where do you start? Everybody's in a different place. And if you're in a smaller city, smaller town, 95% white, and your council's white, then probably the people that are appointed or hired will less likely be diverse. And so you do have to start there in those communities with the awareness, with the education. And that's what we're doing with our professional association about what is conscious, what is unconscious bias, the importance of it, the historical marginalization of people of color, and create that level of sensitivity. Then if you're in other communities, that are already serving diverse constituents and residents, and yet they feel like they are not reflected in the elected leadership, and they are not, reflected in the kind of people that are.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right.
All right. Well, then that's my sign to wrap it up.
No, please continue. There was.
Then you have to have those tough conversations with them as well. But I think in both it has to be data informed. So there's the moral reasoning, and some people don't get it, but you have to be able to show that, look, in all of these, if we're going to be an all-American city, then it needs to be a city for all the residents, and you can't have disproportionate outcomes in housing and homelessness. All those are indicative of here in Grand Rapids of people of color, or use of force incidents, or where people stand in terms of economic prosperity, and make it a data informed conversation and say that we're compelled to make this community better for everyone.
So obviously, I mean, the data part, that's really important. And it's always important in our work, data-driven decisions. But, that doesn't seem to really get us all the way past it, right? Because, obviously, I mean, it's an emotional issue, but you have folks out there that feel threatened by all of this, at risk of losing something, characterizations of ICMA that because of this work that we have become political, lost sight of the mission, left-leaning. I'm just giving you all of the different phrases and what have you. And and the backdrop is, of course, the national dialogue that surrounds all of that, and the polarization and so on. So data is important, but it doesn't get you all the way there. What about the rest of it?
Mark,
Let's see. Yeah, there you go.
yeah, so what I would say is, we're all, whether you're on this panel or just in this room, we all have a high level of emotional intelligence, and that has led us to be successful with, dealing with, managing, leading, growing people in our respective disciplines. And how I handle it is, I challenge the people to sort of rethink some of their position. And that means, I firmly believe that this is an emotional conversation. The emotional power of what we're talking about drives people to either one side or the other, and that's where they stay. But if we can talk to them and make sure that they understand that what we are trying to do is show them, whether it's information that proves that what we're going through is real, because I've heard, what more do you want? Or almost like, why are you not happy yet? And it's like, how long are you going to keep doing this and taking this position? And I mean, we all know the answer is we're never going to stop until we either make it better for ourselves, but heaven forbid we make it for the generation behind us. That should be the goal, that, what we don't solve in our lifetime is left better for those who will come after us. And having that conversation with them, hopefully it will allow, when I speak to them, allow for them to take that knowledge of that we have, as a society, been so incorrect in how we have treated this one population of our society, that we immediately want to do something different that will have a lasting and legacy effect on how people in generations behind us are treated. For me, that is where I'm trying to go. I'm trying to just, again, I'm not going to say change hearts and minds, but I am, that's always I got. I am interested in making that emotional intelligence connection, because I think that's where the leadership that we are has our biggest and most impactful.
Well, I would add, one, Marc Ott, I appreciate the profile and courage you are currently living, and applaud your efforts as well as the ICMA Executive Board's efforts to really try and centralize this as a skill set. Like every other skill set we have deemed as critical to be effective city managers, right? That understanding inequity in the community and solutions to root out inequity improves the community for everyone. Centering that as a critical skill set, and that, you know, that's how we get there. You asked what we need from white colleagues, and I would say we need more than the quiet corner support, right? We get the pat on the back or the whisper in the ear, you're doing the right thing, you know, you're so brave, you know, all those kinds of things. We need them out front and leading. And, you know, I've had the opportunity to meet several managers who are incredibly knowledgeable about the history of inequities in this country, specifically for their community. And they are moving forward and taking amazing steps, taking their communities forward to correcting them. And we need to hear more from them. In fact, their colleagues need to hear more from them, because at the end of the day, there still aren't enough of us to change it all overnight. You know, as Mark Washington said, we can look at our own communities, our own organizations, but to have this broader impact that needs to happen, we need more leadership, loud and vocal leadership from our white colleagues.
I couldn't agree with that more. And when I think about what's been going on over the last couple of years, right? I mean, prior to all of that, most of the time it was just us talking. And one of the things that has been uniquely different, particularly in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, is that it wasn't just us. And I've told the story, I'll abbreviate it here, about in the aftermath. I happened to be in Austin, and I happened to be catching the news, and I could see the mass of protesters marching between City Hall and the state capitol. And I became conscious of myself peering closely to the TV set. And then I realized that the reason I was peering closely to the TV set is because I was trying to identify people of color in the crowd. It was that challenging, and that was really different, you know, a different image relative to my life experience up to that point. So I think what you just said is really powerful. And I also want to note and appreciate your compliment about what ICMA is doing in terms of this work, you know, and trying to, you know, bring this knowledge of DEI to our members, you know, as a context and a basis for developing the skill set. Because we do think that's important, and that is exactly the reason why we're doing the work. It's not because we're trying to be political. It's not because we're left-leaning or any of that stuff. It's our job, right, to give you guys relevant, whether you agree or not. These conversations impact all of our communities, so you want to be knowledgeable about it. Tammi, you were trying to get into the pattern.
Yeah, I appreciate it, sir. So this is good. We're hearing the conversations about increasing emotional intelligence and bringing data into the conversation to appeal to individuals and kind of centering the conversation around equity. I have a private question from one of our participants that is dealing with a little bit more intense challenge in their jurisdiction. And they posed this question, saying, City Council adopted a DEI goal as their #1 goal, but no real action behind it. There wasn't even unanimous support for a recent equity resolution denouncing white supremacy and anti-hate. I am an assistant city manager and responsible for the organization operations. Any suggestions on how to navigate equity and inclusion in a city where the elected officials don't unanimously support adopting an equity resolution, and the city manager has to be cautious and careful of not getting out of step with their 5 bosses?
So that goes back to our earlier question or comment when we said, what if you don't have that political support, then what?
Mm-hmm.
So we just went through the conversation here about whether or not we would declare racism as a public health crisis. And we did adopt a resolution doing that, but it was not without a lot of discussion on, is it just performative, or, what does a resolution get you that good policy doesn't? And is it either one or is it both? Obviously, it's both. And so I think for that person in that position, obviously you can't override the will of the governing body, but there are other things that you can measure. So if there's a D&I goal, well, the governing body is not responsible for hiring in the workforce. That is a management responsibility. So how you recruit, where you recruit, what your contracts are that would either impede or would help in terms of and diversify the workforce. All of those are management prerogatives that the organization, the leadership, the manager's office can be part of. Particularly what I've found, at least in the cities that I work with, there may be a lot of process in onboarding and hiring at the lower levels in the organizations, but at the senior level in the organization, directors and higher, that prerogative is of the city manager. And if the manager wants to lead the workforce in DE&I, he has to show that he or she has to show that their office is as diverse as the community that they serve, their office and their senior managers in the organization. Mark, I think you did a great job of that in Austin, and that's one of the things that I embody, that regardless of the historical issues in the rest of the organization, the top, you have to set the tone at the top. The other thing I think would be good is in terms of just the culturing of the workforce, and that goes back to awareness both in the workplace about what good, responsible D&I practices are, and not just about how we get along, but how we do businesses. Our MWBE contracts awarded, how does that look, as well as how we create allies in the community. And so a lot of organizations are focused on how do we train our employees, but what we've done here is how do we likewise have these good conversations with community members who want to partner with us and be realistic about goal setting, what we can get done together.
Yeah, I would just add, I'm sorry, Tammy, were you going to?
No, go ahead.
I would just add that, we all know in this field can be fickle, right? We report to elected officials, and oftentimes a special meeting and a majority vote can end your tenure in that community. And that happens to the best of us who are doing all the right things, who believe they're all in line with what their elected officials want and what the community has asked for, and you still lose your job. So I feel that if you're trying to do this work or anything else in the field with a fear of losing your job, it's going to be hard to make any kind of change in your organization, from the smallest to some of these more impactful, life-changing changes. So, we all have to keep that in mind. I'm not encouraging people to go out and become martyrs for their organization. Like anything else, there are controversial topics in our communities that we have to learn how to strategize around, how to work with our elected officials, how to bring them along, how to identify community partners. We know how to do those things, and we've done them on from zoning, land use challenges to other lightning rod issues in the community. This certainly is much more impactful, and for most of us, it's personal, and it's difficult to separate the emotion. And certainly, the polarized environment that we're all living through right now isn't helping. But I think those fundamental tools that we've always used are still what we have to do to push forward, and you can't do that afraid. You're just not going to get far.
I agree. You remind me of a comment that Bob Terrell once made to me about the job. He said, you can't do the job out of fear, and you can't fear to do it, right? And we all have that responsibility. Tammy, were you going to get in the pattern a moment ago?
Yeah, I was just going to add, for that person that asked the question, use your resources. As Tanisha mentioned, use your resources outside of the organization. Here in Georgia, we have the Georgia Municipal Association, and they have been intentional about helping address, various issues. And I believe they have even hired a specific person on their staff. And sometimes I found as a city manager, my council will listen more to people outside of the organization than they will me. So, use your resources and bring in those individuals to help train and, encourage. And as you mentioned, stand, serve without fear or favor. But do what you need to do to get the word out, and all you can do is try your best in educating those that may be closed-minded to this topic, but hopefully they will. And Tanisha said, "Don't say hearts and minds, but open their hearts and minds."
Jerome, you have a thought about all this?
Oh, yes, sir. It's hard to say what hasn't already been said, but when you're in that position where it is tough, where, you're trying to lead from your seat, and I believe that everyone can lead from whichever seat they're in the organization, that one is a particularly tough one when you're trying to go against something that clearly is not supported at the top of the food chain. What I would caution the individual is just, as you go external and reach out to some of these partners that have been mentioned, just be careful, make sure you communicate to your city manager as you're doing your efforts, and so that there's that pathway of protection for you. And, your city manager can always say, yes, I knew what you were doing. I was in favor of, the route being taken, because that's a good layer for your security. But I think that the other information that all my other colleagues said was spot on.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna pose a question. I wasn't sure that I was going to ask it, but since I think maybe it was you, Tammy, that asked me what the word allyship meant, as I recall. So I'm going to give the definition of that word as a segue into asking the question. And it's a term used in contemporary social justice activism to describe efforts by members of a privileged in-group to advance the interests of marginalized groups, both in society at large and within particular social contexts, such as universities and workplaces. And the question is, what role has allyship played in the progression of your career?
I can start with that. I am a ICMA fellow alum. And if you aren't familiar with that program, it's an incredible program started by ICMA in the early 2000s to recruit graduate students into the city manager's office. I was honored to have been selected for that program. The way that it works, you apply to the program, and cities sign up to be hosts of fellows. There's a panel that ranks all of the applications, and they do their best to match you through an interview process where the city still needs to select you, and you select that city. I was fortunate to be ranked #1 in my class that year for the process. And I recall when I accepted the position in Davenport, Iowa. So I'm a little background. I'm from Cleveland. I'm from inner city Cleveland, and I found myself moving to Davenport, Iowa. And my first day, the HR person was taking me around the organization, introducing me to folks in the organization, and she kept telling them that I was in this minority program that ICMA created. Because in her mind, I had to be, right? It had to be a special program for minorities in order for me to somehow have gotten that role. So I had to spend some time educating her and the organization that no, it's open to everyone. And yeah, I still was ranked #1. So, okay. But there's this, Marc mentioned it earlier, this exceptionalism thing that can sometimes be harmful for us as we try to ascend and we try to bring others along. But honestly, think about my formative years in local government happening in Davenport, Iowa, where the population was less than 10% African American. The boss, the man who hired me, he was city administrator at the time, white, middle-aged man. And outside of Cy Murray, And until more recently, he was and still is my biggest champion. And for me, that is what allyship is about, especially when we talk about diversifying this profession and any other field that's, where the majority is going to be white men. We need the white men to understand the leadership imperative around hiring, mentoring, promoting diverse staff. And, I think his approach wasn't one of, I'm going to go find a Black person to hire to bring to Davenport. I certainly think he was conscious of that. And I think that was probably one of his goals. But he never treated me that way. It was always, I selected you and we are fortunate to have you because you were ranked #1 in the class, and a city like Davenport was able to snag you. And I want to make sure you get a chance to do whatever it is you want here in this community. And you want to be a city manager, and I'm going to help you do that. And it always felt like it was just the merit for me. And I think that was helpful as well as I progressed through my early years in local government management. But, there are many of us who have these stories where the majority of us are going to be hired by somebody that's not Black. There just aren't that many of us. And again, my initial comment about what do we need from our colleagues in the field? We need more leadership. We need them to step up. We need them to create these opportunities for others in the field, particularly those that don't look like them. And we need them to understand that that same effort needs to be put toward the most vulnerable in your community. At some point, equality creates these inequities that we are suffering with. And I think that's some of the struggle that our colleagues are having, that we have this sort of, as city managers, we should be providing equal service. And if you're telling me I need to do more over here and less over there, that's not equal, and that's against what we should stand for. But there's a point where equality creates inequity. And I think that's the gap that they're not understanding.
Thank you for that, Tanisha. Marc, you have some thoughts about that?
Well, I affirm much of what Tanisha said, but I stand in a space of privilege in that my first manager that I worked for was African American. My last manager that I worked for was African American before I became city manager. So I had the chance to really be in strong places where I had both good mentoring, but yeah, I also had, they weren't the entire organization. The entire organization had people in there that had been, part of the system for a long time. And it is important to have good allies internal in the organization. And I was thinking about it not only from the perspective of my own career, but going back to the question that I heard before about the assistant that was trying to change policy. And you have to have both allies in terms of your professional development, but also allies on the issue. And if you are, if you find yourself in a position where your council's majority white or the organization's majority white and you're the exception in the organization. I appreciate Tanisha's point about going to Iowa from Cleveland. But I know another manager who did exactly that, went to work for a council that was not very diverse and had a real progressive agenda and did not have any allies on the council that he was working with, but yet pushed that agenda pretty hard, and I don't want to use the term martyr, but it was not a good fit. And after a while, they had no confidence in him, and he's fortunately, I think he's going to be okay. But you have to make sure you have both allies. I think in the organization, you have to have allies in the community. As well as, not that we look for political favors on the council, but you have to know who is in support of an agenda, particularly when it talks when you're refer to advancing DE&I and specifically advancing your career as an African American in an appointed position.
You know, it's interesting for me as I listen to both Tanisha and you, and I think back on the beginning of my career. I've never worked for a Black manager in my entire career. In fact, the administrator that put me on the path was white, and it was my last semester of grad school. It was in Southfield, Michigan, and I didn't know anything from anything about local government. But it was one of those deals. I don't know what it was. Because he didn't have to do it back then, especially back then. He didn't have to do it, but he took this skinny Black kid from Pontiac, Michigan, who was trying to finish grad school, who thought he was going to law school, and he gave me a shot. And he did it by, making it clear that he took the internship seriously, introduced it that way to the organization, gave me real work to do. Now, mind you, back then, Southfield, Michigan was predominantly white, affluent, community, and that's what he did, and gave me real work to do. And I saw the power of what happens at the local government level, and like in the stories we were telling earlier, that was fundamentally important. I was fundamentally impacted by that. But I can also tell you that just a few years after that, 5 or 6, 7 years after that, I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, as Marc was saying earlier. And I had applied for a job that by then I thought I was pretty qualified for. And in fact, a friend of mine worked there. And you probably sent your resume to places and never heard anything back. And this community was a bedroom community. It was white, basically. And I didn't hear anything back. And I ran into my friend, John, who worked there. I said, John, what's up, man, with your boss? I haven't gotten any reaction to my resume. John's white, and I remember his face turned red, and he put his head down, and he said, Marc, he said, man, I don't know how to tell you this. He said, but that man said, so long as I'm the city manager here, there will never be and use the N-word, working in my office or anywhere else in the organization as long as I'm here. Right? Just a few years apart. White man put me on the path, right? Didn't have to do it. A few years later, one clearly because of the color of my skin, not qualification, wouldn't even respond to my application.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah,
that's powerful. And I need to give credit to other managers who, unfortunately, Marc, I've been supported by every manager that I worked for. 2 African American, 5 that were white, and none of them had the reaction that you shared.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Do we have any questions in that?
Yes, we actually have about 4 questions. I'm cognizant that we have about 12 minutes remaining, but I wanted to put it, and this conversation has been so rich. I know a lot of things are being addressed. So we have a number of participants in the audience that are not yet in the city manager seat. And so there are 2 questions that were posed from individuals that are still looking at that seat. One of them touches back on our conversation about allyship. And it's simply, how do you help your city manager become an ally? And the other question was, I've spent 3 decades in local government, and I've noticed that most assistant city managers stay longer in their roles than city managers. And what factors were key in your decisions to making the move from assistant to manager? And how did you balance the importance of employment security or longevity for you and your family? 2 different questions. I'll leave it to the panel to address which one you feel most.
Marc, I sure would like to hear your reaction to the second question.
On me there about how long to stay as assistant city manager.
Oh, then what influenced you to how did you make the jump? All that. Yeah.
And balance your life with it.
Yeah, what influenced me is a guy by the name of Marc Ott. because I really saw, I saw myself wanting to, speaking of Bob pretty much worked for one organization his entire career, and he stayed in line until he had an opportunity to finish his career as manager, and worked in a place where he was very familiar. He was, if you will, the hometown hero by the time that he became manager. And so I had this paradigm that everything was going to happen for me at Fort Worth. And then when Marc became manager in Austin, I was assistant director of a department in Fort Worth, and he had a director opportunity and made the offer to me. And they, of course, countered, and he said, unless they have the right title, I don't care what money that they offer you, that's not the right one. And he always encouraged me to test my mettle. And the same for assistant manager. And I saw myself even then in Austin, kind of standing in line, waiting waiting my turn, if you will. And then I had the conversation with Marc's departure, change in leadership, that it was time. And he was often encouraging people to have resume will travel, go find a city to manage yourself. And the right opportunity came up. And of course you have the fear that you serve at the will of the council or the commission, and the tenure of managers, and that's part of the job. But what I found thus far is that there is much more reward in a lot of ways of being a manager. And I think Tanisha mentioned it earlier as well as Marc. You can't do the job out of fear. And you got to do it the best as you can, and know the reality that if you do your very best and you do a good job, if there's by chance that you don't have the full faith, confidence of your elected governing body, that there is somebody out there that will want that kind of leadership in the organization. And hopefully you will have allies that will help, professional association, ICMA, NFPPA, and others that will help you in career transition.
I was going to say, for me, pardon me, I had been an assistant manager for probably over 10 years, and I was pretty comfortable in that role. And when I was in Smyrna, Georgia, pardon me, we had a change in our city administrator, and actually our mayor, our white mayor, came to me and said, Tammi, you have been the assistant city administrator for 7.5 years. I don't want to have to go out and look for anybody. You've been doing the job. You take on that responsibility when the manager, the city administrator is not here. Why don't you consider taking on that role? And of course, after talking to my husband and telling him, at that time our son was very young. And I said, the mayor has come to me and asked me to take this role. It's something that I'm a little afraid to do. However, this is an opportunity that if I don't take this now, I may not have this opportunity again, an opportunity that I had envisioned and dreamed about. And so how can I go out and tell other people, go after your dreams, don't be afraid, and I not do it myself? And so I took that leap of faith after much prayer, and I was like, God, please, give me a clear sign that this is the way you want me to go. And, again, the rest is history, or her story, my story. And I would encourage, any assistant managers, don't be afraid. Yes, this job puts you in a very vulnerable situation. You serve at the pleasure of the council. But as Marc mentioned, you can only do your best. And that's what I try to do each and every day. Just try to give my best to this community. And so, don't be afraid. Take the leap. Do it, because you can do it.
Not a better advertisement than that right there. Thank you for that. The other one that was up there was how do you help your city manager become an ally?
Yes.
Any thoughts about that? Real quick.
Well, Marc, this is Jerome. What I would say about trying to help your, city manager become an ally it starts with earning the trust of that city manager so that your opinion can be heard. You know, if you, again, if like we all are, if we're good at building relationships and showing, you know, our value and our decision making and, you know, how we treat the discipline of public administration with the respect it deserves, then your city manager should be willing to listen to that conversation with you. I'll stop right there, but
Yeah.
to me,
That's right.
All right. Mark, I had a couple of other questions. I know we're short on time, but I felt like they were really important and this group could lend some important insight. Okay, so the first question I wanted to present was, do any of you see, or where do you see communities are seriously applying the equity lens to your hiring and promotion in the communities? And that's a question that's come up in some other groups that are working on this. So I want to make sure I highlighted that. And then the final question, Mark, perhaps before you pose your last question to the group, concerns the best tools for applying equity and eliminating unconscious bias, et cetera, within the organizations, and the placement of or necessity of the chief diversity officer or something similar. So those two questions, whoever wants to take whichever one, please feel free.
I'll jump in on the second one. I would tell you that I was very skeptical of creating a position for racial equity in my organization. As you heard earlier, we're a relatively small organization, and I also have just seen that the majority of folks doing this work, especially in local government, are Black women that are essentially re-traumatizing themselves all day, every day, trying to do this equity work, because it is deep work. And I was concerned about that. I was concerned about it being ceremonial, even though they would report to me. I had lots of sort of concerns. And then I realized that like most things that I try to hold on to and do myself in the organization as the city manager, it's not going to be as effective without support, internal support for the organization. And I want to make sure that while I'm not trying to change hearts and minds, that I make sure that my folks have access to the resources that they can learn, potentially become allies, potentially become more informed about why this work is important, because I'm still going to hold them accountable for it. And as we do that, we need to make sure that the organization has the resources to be successful. And I think it's important to have at least someone, if not a team, if your organization can support that, to make sure that the organization has access to those resources. So I did come around. And I still have those same concerns and want to make sure that whomever we hire, because we're going to be creating a position, has the support from me, and we can identify some external resources for them, because more than likely it's going to be a person of color. More than likely it will be a woman of color who has to carries those burdens, I think, much more deeply than the rest of the organization. So I want to make sure they don't burn out.
I would like to perhaps take a stab at addressing both in one question and one response. I think Chief Diversity Officer, Chief Equity Officer is very important, because if a city says the way that we manage our finances is important, you have a Chief Financial Officer. If you say the way that we keep our city safe, you have a Chief of Police. The way that we manage infrastructure, you have a city engineer. So having, if D&I is important, particularly in larger organizations that have the resources to have someone focus on it singularly, then that's an opportunity. And if not, then if you already have an existing employee where you can make additional responsibilities assigned to that employee, then that's an option as well. And I think to practically use your D&I officer is to have them at the table. So every year we have the prerogative of proposing the annual budget. And in that budget, you have funding for each department, but you also have position allocation, how many positions you're going to have. And so normally a regular budget conversation would say, I need this many, I need this, I have this many, I need this many more, and this is what it's going to cost. And so when we talk about both the resources that are needed, I also have our D&I officer at the table to talk about the existing workforce and how are you diversifying your current workforce? How will you bring talent if I give you an added resource, extra position? What is your plan to make sure the recruitment will be diversified? And also, when you talk practically about the things that are needed in each department's budget for supplies and contracts, having the D&I person there as part of those conversations prior to the budget preparation lets the organization know that you're serious about it. It's just not perfunctory, but it's a real position that has the ear of the manager and direct access to the manager that I'm listening to and taking seriously and making decisions on how to manage the organization.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Tanisha. We're out of time, but to close us out, I'm going to continue down the line of our panel and offer both Jerome and Tammi some final remarks as well. Jerome?
Sure, absolutely. My final remarks would be, as we talk about, whether it's the diversity and equity, leadership, emotional intelligence, should I go into a manager role? Should I wait? Make sure everyone has a mentor, someone that they're able to speak to, someone they're able to bounce ideas off of. Make sure you don't try to figure it out all by yourself. We're all here together. We're a community. We're a group of people who have come together for a common reason and a common purpose, and our doors should be open and available. So if I know they'll share our information, please feel free to reach out to myself and others and just let us be a long-standing resource and create some relationships to help us get through what can be very heavy if we all try to take it on ourselves. So those are my parting words. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed the conversation and enjoyed meeting you all. And it was great discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jerome. Tammi?
And my closing remark is to you, Marc Ott. Continue doing what you're doing. Continue having these type of conversations. And I hope that you and the ICMA board continue to focus on these type of topics because, as we said earlier, it's not something that we can just discuss, this point in time. This is something that we got to continue on. And that's the same thing that we're going to be doing within, specifically me within my organization is, continuing to focus on equity, diversity, inclusion. And hopefully, if anybody needs to reach out to me, as Jerome mentioned, I'm sure they're going to be sharing our contact information. Please don't hesitate to do so. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Tanisha, I'm going to give you, Mark, one more shot.
Okay.
Tanisha?
Thank you. I'll be brief. I'll just say, leading while Black, being Black in America, we all understand what that means for us, those of us who are Black. I would say I've learned through learning about racial equity and the historic disparities in our country that the playing field isn't level. We all know that. But what has been encouraging is this honor and privilege that we all have to be serving in seats of influence. No matter where you are in a seat in local government, you have the opportunity to make a direct impact to really turn this around. And that is the most encouraging piece for me as we can reflect on how challenging it is to be Black in any role. It is certainly a really great opportunity that lies before us all to really start to turn the wheel and make some positive change. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Tanisha. Well said. Mr. Mark?
Mark, you're on mute, and you're wrong for letting the pastor close us out, right?
Well,
that's the benediction, right?
Man.
as I take my seat, Mark, I appreciate you having this conversation, and I echo everything everyone said. And while it's important for us to lead while we're Black, I think we need to be Black while we're leading and not be afraid of having the hard conversations around D&I, but also taking the appropriate action. That's what I've heard a lot today, is that it's not just effective in the cognitive domain about just thinking or knowing or feeling, but making sure that we actually take the courageous and bold steps to cause improvement. And that means that we have to act as well. So thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. And I don't have any closing remarks other than to thank this panel. It is, for me, just an honor to have the opportunity to spend this time with you and humbly serve as your moderator for the great and powerful discussion and insights that you all have shared today. I want to thank those of you who logged in for this discussion. We appreciate you too, and the questions and observations that some of you put into the chat. I want to thank Tammi, who's always there, taking care of most, if not all of us at ICMA in one way or another. And of course, there are always the technical people in the background who make things happen, and more often than not, like today, seamlessly. So our thanks to them as well. So this is just one in a series of conversations that we've had, and courageous conversations that we are going to continue to have. This is a moment, a time, it's an inflection point, and we will not allow it to dissipate without change, without substantive, lasting, positive change in all of the ways that we've been talking about the last hour and a half. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.